Okey, selamat sejahtera dan selamat petang kepada semua para hadirin kalian semua dan selamat datanglah ke dalam forum malam ini yang forum dalam talian JPKK, kempen hapus sistem kontrak dan jaminan kerja hak untuk semua. JPKK mengajukan satu forum ini untuk mengetahkan isu yang dihadapi oleh pekerja kontrak yang kebanyakannya ke Frontliner Cleaner. Isu yang berpunca daripada ketamakan sistem kroni dan orang tengah sebagai majikan dan sistem kontrak. Forum ini actually bertujuan untuk share sedikit tentang masalah pekerja kita yang sistem kontrak dan sebenarnya kenalkan kenapa sistem kontrak ini tidak adil kepada pekerja-pekerja kita. Forum ini malam ini kita amat berbanggalah dapat jemput 3 orang, seorang dari researcher JPKK yang kita buat satu laporan tentang sistem kontrak Malaysia. Yang panelis kedua adalah saudari Thilemma. Panelis pertama adalah Sharan Raj, seorang researcher, dan saya akan kenalkan dia punya sedikit latar belakang. Dia seorang data analyst dalam his job, dan dia sekarang dia yang ada pengelaras laporan JPKK. He headed the research lah untuk kita punya JPKK. Dan panelis kedua merupakan saudari Thilemma. Hello, saudari Thilemma. Beliau adalah Setiausaha Agung Kesatuan Pekerja Swasta Hospital Kerajaan. Beliau juga adalah seorang pekerja pembersihan di Hospital Bahagia Hulu Kinta, Tanjung Rambutan. Beliau sudah berkhidmat 23 tahun sebenarnya dari 1997. Semalam saya ada cicat dengan dia, dia kata dia masuk bekerja selepas sistem kontrak pekerjaan kerajaan ini diperkenalkan. Kita akan dengarlah sedikit experience daripada beliau. Saudari Thilemma sangat berani dan sentiasa bersuara untuk hak pekerja. Thilemma sentiasa peka dengan masalah-masalah pekerja dan cuba sedaya upaya untuk menyelesaikan masalah tersebut. Beliau juga seorang yang mengaktifkan kesatuan pekerja dan dalam perjuangan kesatuan. Okay, panelis ketiga adalah seorang profesor actually. Minta maaf sebab saya kena guna bahasa Inggeris dalam sini. Professor Niaz actually is hi Professor Niaz. He's actually an academic from Universiti Malaya, and he's also a lecturer right now there. And he's part of the director in Global Labour Organization. He received his doctorate degree in economics from Oxford University in 2005. Other than that, his more research is focused on poverty, inequality, well-being and education, labour market, skill formation and gender issues on the Southeast Asia and such. And so, okay, back to the forum. Forum malam ini actually dia berstruktur macam ni. 3 panelis akan share sedikit experience mereka dan kita akan open Q&A to the floor lah. Saya akan gunakan bahasa dengan English dalam forum ini dan kita just dive straight to it lah. Let's introduce saudara Sharan, JPKK researcher, untuk bentangkan sedikit dia punya laporan. Hello Sharan. Hi Sharan, you have to unmute your, yeah.
Okay.
Hi Sharan, how are you doing?
I'm good, thank you Wing, thank you for having me.
Okay. You're part of the research team of JPKK. Why do you think that the JPKK wanted to have this study at the first place?
I think first of all, it was a very interesting opportunity to work with JPKK as well. This is a very interesting field also. Okay. I think the study actually revealed a lot of things. What exactly happened, especially because a lot of people say privatization is good, outsourcing is good, let's get the private sector. But our findings actually told a very different story. And you'll be surprised, we're not only talking it kills job security, but the research conclude with you actually kills job. Okay. I think without much ado, I actually have a very small short presentation to share. I think maybe we can just quickly go to our slides there. Okay. All right. Can you see the slides? Now, moving forward from there, I think let's understand what exactly happened because prior to the year 1995, all of the service was actually with the public sector. They were government staff enjoying the government benefits and pension and so on. So they were actually government staff until 1985. You see, this one started when then Prime Minister Dr. Mahathir actually introduced the what we know as the National Privatization Policy. Okay, in 1995, okay, in reference to the National Privatization Policy, the Prime Minister Office, which is also led by Dr. Mahathir then, in the 7 Malaysia Plan, decided to carve out some of the government support services to the private sector. So this is the beginning where private sector involvement in the government support service formally began, right? And in also that particular year, October 1995, during the 96 budget announcement, then Finance Minister Anwar Ibrahim actually announced the outsourcing of the hospital support system. So this one is what we know as Generation 1 hospital support system, the first group that actually was outsourced, right? So 5 hospital subsectors was outsourced. So some of it is cleaning, incineration, medical waste management, mechanical and electrical, which something plumbing, electrical. So that's what we call the M&E service and so on. Now, in the following year, during the 97 budget speech, then Finance Minister declared that the whole process was a success. The outsourcing was declared as a success. So this will be very contradicting compared to our findings after 25 years that it's actually not really a success. It actually made things worse. Now, when we look at the school support service, it was formally outsourced in the 1997 by then Education Minister Najib Razak, which eventually will become the country's Prime Minister later on. Now, the current study that we did focus on the Generation 2 hospital support system, which was issued from 2015 onwards. So this 10-year concession is worth 3 billion ringgit for the period of 10 years, and it covers the entire country. So this was actually issued by then Health Minister Dr. S. Subramaniam. Okay, so these are the very key events that is very important. Now, I did mention that in 96 budget speech, Anwar declared it as a success. So in the 97 budget speech, declared success. So we actually did a very interesting fact check. So some of the claims that was made that this privatization, that the public hospital will become like a 5-star hotel. But in reality, during the transition period, the hospital environment became extremely messy because the new contracts workers were very inexperienced. The companies were very inexperienced. They bought in companies that manage hotel to run hospital. So the entire hospital was actually in a terrible mess. And the existing cleaners, which was called at that time as hospital attendants or health attendants, and the hospital management was actually went in training the workers themselves. So they were training the hospital workers. And this was the case throughout the whole country because they gave the contract in a very hasty manner. The private sector did not have the capacity. So the public sector was forced to transfer their capacity to the private sector. So the public sector, the private sector and the public sector, but they could not actually work together for the first 1 year properly. So it became as a mess. And even if you look today, our public hospital is nowhere close to a 5-star hotel, which was promised. And one of the things that were told just before the privatization was the health attendant do not have to do the cleaning, do not have to clean the hospital anymore. And this is not really actually true because they were immediately shifted them to assist the nurse. But most of these health attendants lacked the expertise. So they were forced into early retirement. And during that period, within the first 10 years of privatization, a lot of health attendants took early retirement because they could not cope with the new work, which they totally was not trained for, and they lacked that expertise, right? So reduce the maintenance burdens on hospital administration is one thing what a lot of pro-privatization people say. But in reality, like I mentioned just now, the hospital administration, they had to organize a lot of training section for the private workers in between, and a lot of intervention was done to ensure the hospital operations are not jeopardized at the beginning here. Private sectors were more responsive? Not really. Not really. A lot of poor services by the private companies. But I'm not here saying at the but it goes unreported because of the high red tape. So this prevented a lot of hospitals from filing their complaints, right? And it's clearly not sure what would they define success at that point of time. So a lot of things that was claimed didn't really translate into reality. Now, let's look at the current mechanism which was practiced. When we look at the school mechanism, this is very funny because what happens is that that particular school will already has an existing group of cleaners, gardeners, as well as security guard. But every few years once, the Ministry of Education, they issue requests for contracts, okay, for people for support service. So a contractor actually formally bids it, and they are chosen. How they are chosen, we are not sure. It's actually protected under the Official Secret Act. An act that is used for defense procurement is actually used to protect the school cleaning procurement. God knows why, right? So, and then what happens is this new contractor re-employs the worker again. So let me get this properly, guys. So that particular school will have an existing worker, all right? And what happens every 3 years, the contractors is rotated. So when the new contractor comes in, they re-employ the same worker for another 3 years. And after the end of the contract, they let go of the workers, another new contractor comes and taking the worker. So what you have here is some sort of a rotational system. The same workers will be working in the same school for 25 years, no problem. Okay, but the contractor shifts every 3 years, right? So this is unnecessary. This is very much unnecessary. Okay, so that is why you go to a particular school, or maybe even in your school, that case, you have seen the same cleaners for 10, 15 years, but the contractor is actually been changing again and again and again. So none of these workers are permanently with a particular contractor. So their job becomes very, very extremely precarious. And now when we look at the current mechanism, now when we look at the hospital support system, okay, so the generation 2, which is beyond 2015, there are actually 5 different regions that have been split. Okay, so we focus on the northern region, which was contracted by Agenta Berhad, which is also a government-linked company. It's an indirect subsidiary of Khazanah Nasional Berhad. So the workers here is a bit more different because they are re-employed under different subsidiary. So the same particular company will have a different subsidiary, or they employ a third-party contractor to re-employ the same worker again and again. So you will see the same workers, they'll be working in the same hospital for 20 over years, but they'll be reporting duty, or their salary is paid by different contractors. However, the master contractor will usually remains the same throughout the generation 1 or generation 2. So this makes the workers very, very precarious as well, right? So exactly what the concession company does in case, since they're outsourcing the workers, well, they outsource the human resource. The supply of personal protection equipment such as masks, gloves, aprons, hand wash, hand sanitizer, and they manage the incineration of the medical waste, as well as the maintenance of electrical and mechanical works for an hospital, right? Now, one of the things that we look from because of this working system is their working condition is extremely, I could not share, it's actually very, very poor. It's some of the worst. Interestingly, in Malaysia, within the past 25 years, we have built electric railways, we have built twin towers, but the worker condition has actually really, really regressed, and actually have not found a word to describe their working condition yet, right? But let's start with the wage comparison. Now, you're assuming that the worker, if you look at the basic salary in 1997, the private sector worker earned 500. And 23 years later, the same worker in the same hospital only earns at about the minimum wage. So that's the far they have gotten. So within 23 years, the salary have just went slightly over double. But the same position in the government staff, okay, they may have started lesser, but if you look after 23 years, their salary is actually have went up multiple times. And the same worker in the year 2020 their basic salary is higher than the average, than the minimum wage of the hospital cleaner under the private sector. Okay, so if you look at the year 2020 there itself, it tells you the big difference, right? So what they have really missed out is the wage increment itself. Okay. Now, if you look on non-wage remuneration, nothing really have significantly improved. Okay, if you look in the annual leave under the public sector, right, the worker can actually entitle somewhere between 20 days up to 180 days, right? But you look in private sector, what happens? The worker, which has been working for nearly 23 years, have only received up to 12 days, right? This although they have been working for 23 years, but because they have been renewed under multiple contractors again and again and again, so they are seen as new workers every time. So it took them so many years before they even reached that 12 years period. And this 12 days period was recently achieved because of the hospital union making a big issue that they are being renewed and they're losing the existing benefit. So they got these 12 days benefits, or else they would have been still stuck with the 8 days benefits for the past 23 years. Now, when we look overall in terms of benefit erosion, so I made a quick comparison of the workers that start working in 1997 as well as the same workers benefit today in year 2020. If you look, they have actually only increased in terms of 1 day of public holiday. That's because a few years ago, Malaysia declared that 16 September will be a national holiday. So that's about it. And when you look everything else, they have eventually slowly throughout every re-employment, every contract renewal, they start losing. And after 20 years, they have lost nearly everything, right? And what they have now is what is stipulated in the Employment Act. So they get the bare minimum, although they have been serving in our public hospital for 23 years non-stop. Now, when we look to school, nothing really much difference. Their life is also as bad as everyone else in the hospital cleaners as well. Now, if you look in 1995 and you compare in year 2020, so I made a quick comparison of workers in the 1995 before outsourcing when they were the government staff, and then the workers in year 2020 when the post-outsourcing, which means now they are the private sector, and assuming the privatization did not happen, where would they stand? So if you look there, the workers are actually working more now. So they are forced to work more now, right? And bear in your mind, the rest hours and prayer hours for Muslims are not specified. And the workers have huge amount of burden, huge amount of workload, because they have government have reduced the numbers of cleaners per school. So the workers do not really have a specified rest hour, right? And you look in terms of salary, they have also lost. Assuming there was no outsourcing, the beginning wage of a cleaner is higher than the maximum wage stipulated in the Minimum Wage Act itself. So in this sense, they have actually regressed a lot as well. And when you look at security, so I made a comparison of a government security guard, which is managed under the CGSO. So these are the guys that wearing the light blue shirt you may see sometimes at the Prime Minister's office, at the Parliament, and some government establishment. So when you compare the government security officers with the contract school guards, every school security guard are forced to work for 12 hours. So 8 hours and 4 hours of compulsory overtime, right? And they do not have a specified rest hour as well. So when there's inspection from the headmaster or from PPD, the worker is expected to be at their post. Failure to do so actually may incur penalty in their wages itself. So, and when you look at their working hours, although they work for 12 hours, but their salary, it starts at about 1,100, all right? And inclusive of overtime, it does not go beyond 1,800. So that is the max they can hear. But when you look at the government security guard, if they have worked for a long period of time for that same 20 over years, they would have earned up to 3,800, but only working for 7 hours a day. So this is what have happened in our school security. Now, the overall impact, okay, one of the things people say, government burden have reduced because of privatization. Not really. Not exactly really. So what happens is the human resource management for the Ministry of Finance and the Ministry of Education Health may have come down, okay? But they have lost the control in their respective organization. And this has been repeated complaints we received from the headmasters as well as the retired hospital directors. They have said they have lost control because they could not make any changes that they want. They have to refer to the ministry, and the ministry has to put it in the next contract with the contractors and so on. So it is very tedious, and most likely usually doesn't get approved. So all of that burdens have actually makes it more hard for them. And when you look, because of the contract system, some of the workers are not paid proper wages. They do not get proper leaves. Their overtime are underpaid. They do not have proper pay slip. They have been arbitrarily terminated. So all of these things happen. All the labor abusers have been undergoing in that contract system in the government supply chain. But what happens now, that the whole burden is actually transferred now to EPF, to Pekerja, to the Human Resource Ministry, to multiple departments, because they are now investigating so many cases of labor abuses. And several years ago, Dr. Mazli Malay have actually got involved in this contract system. Okay, and he have actually instructed the PPD as well as JPN, or the District Education Office and the State Education Office, for them to actually get involved and look after it. So this created more bureaucracy for them also, so more work for them. And recently, the Health Ministry Director had to get involved as well when the hospital cleaners were not given proper PPEs. So you see, the claims that the government burdens was reduced was actually not really. So there was a huge load shifting happened. Instead of paying salaries, now they have to go for investigation, enforcement, and so our court system, our judiciary, our grievance department, our labor department, our ministers, our directors are now involved in checking the contract system in the government's supply chain. Now, did the government really saved money is another question that everybody says, because the other things that always say when it comes to privatization, government saved money. Not really, actually. Okay, so what we came to find out that the government is actually paying an additional 200 million, okay, for the contractors, assuming that all of these workers were government staff. If these workers was government staff, okay, the government only needs to fork out at about 1.3 billion. But currently, the government is paying about 1.5 billion ringgit a year for the school security guards alone. But if the government, okay, so and out of that 1.5 billion, only 1 billion is actually paid to the government to the school contractors. All right, so half a billion or 1/3 of it is actually ends up as a contractor's non-wage margin. Now, if you assume that the government actually nationalized all of these workers and pay them 1,800 a month, right? And they only work for they only work for about 8 hours a day. Okay, so the government could actually hire 50% more workers or 60,000 security guards and only pay about 1.3 billion per annum. So long story short, when under the current contract system, the government is paying 1.5 billion, which in returns pay 1 billion in salary for 40,000 workers. But by direct employment, government will actually create 50% more job or 60,000 guard and pay only 1.3 billion. So the savings is nearly 200 million ringgit. So hereby we can conclude that the contractor's premium is 200 million ringgit. So this is 200 million ringgit worth of leakages under the outsourcing program. Now, all of this has a very indirect impact on the contract system workers. We have seen cases where the workers were not paid their wages properly on time. So what happens is they had to borrow from their families, from their neighbors, and so on. And when their wage errands still increases, when the following month's salary does not come in, does not credited, so what happens is they could not pay back their family members or neighbors. So this creates a family issues, all right? And recently we also came to know that the workers are not given proper mask and apron. But bear in mind, our research have found that over the period of few years ago, there has been a lot of austerity measure by the company itself. So the workers only receive one pair of gloves a day, one mask a day. So imagine if this worker, their gloves or their masks were actually tainted by their sweat, by dirt, by feces, by blood in the hospital. Right? So they were told to wash and reuse it again. So this is how bad the workers' state are. And this is a cleanliness issue. And our research also found that one of the cleaners actually got a particular disease from the hospital itself. Okay, so imagine our cleaners who are there cleaning the hospital were not given proper PPE, and she contacted the disease itself. So this happens there. And we have seen cases of broken buckets. We have seen cases of diluted reagents. Diluted cleaning reagents is perfectly normal in the hospital, right? And although workers have complained that the contractors are not giving them proper equipment, the hospital management, whenever they come for a spot check, suddenly the contractors are perfectly aware of the spot check and all the equipments are immediately replaced. All right, so it has become a norm that the workers itself know if there's a new equipments or undiluted reagents coming to the hospital or to school, they know there's a spot check coming. So that's exactly how the whole dynamics is working. Yeah. So these are all the things our workers are facing. And most of them also, because they are so poorly waged, a lot of them are actually staying in rented houses. And in the cases where you have places where they have husband and wife working, so they'll be much more better. But if they are a single mother, they are a single working parent, the family will actually be most probably living in a rented house. So these are the things that we see. And some of workers that we interviewed, especially in school, they do not have a proper pay slip. So they are not giving pay slip at all. So this is what happens. And when they do not have a proper pay slip, they cannot actually go and buy a motorcycle. They can't actually properly take a loan from a bank, nothing. And they are also considerably very, very precarious. They lose in terms of their EPF, Pekerja. So in case they got an accident right after work, they do not get a Pekerja. So these kinds of things are actually very norm in the government supply chain because of this outsourcing, right? And the biggest issue that we saw from here is that the workers has no job guarantee. All right, they can lose their job immediately during what we call as the re-employment process, or even worse, they can be arbitrarily dismissed. And there have been a lot of cases, particularly the school security guard, who have been arbitrarily dismissed because they have voiced against the employer. And some of the cases where the workers have fought in labor court and won, the contractor actually absconded. They went missing. So they have won on paper. The contractor was supposed to pay them. Okay, the court have awarded them the damage, but then the contractor was absconded. They went totally missing, and the government could not enforce it. All right, and these are government contractors we are talking about. So the government contractor did not pay the workers, right? And the government so-called was acted powerless in that sense, lah. Okay. Now, so who is exactly benefiting from this system? Okay, who is exactly benefiting? So our research indicated something very interesting here, right? If you look that the system was not privatized, the wage difference between the public and private sector tells the straight difference, right? If you look at our current DG, he's earning somewhere between 18,000 to 26,000, whereas a hospital cleaner, assuming was still under the government, would have earned somewhere between 1,002 to 3,000. Okay, but this is for the year 2017, bear in mind. And in year 2017, the CEO of UEM Agenta, his monthly income was about 160,000. That goes into several millions a year. Okay, but the same contract worker only earn about 1,000. So you look at the wage difference is so much high under the private sector, right? So this is actually contradicts to the government policy of fighting inequality, because this directly contributes to inequality as well as precarious state as well as job insecurity for the workers. And like I mentioned just now, the contractors' premium that the government is paying is nearly 200 million ringgit per year. Okay, 200 million ringgit for several hundred, for less than 100 contractors, right? But then again, what happens is the workers are losing out here. Okay, so the main beneficiary here is actually the top managerial class, the top elite groups, the top business group, but the workers are really, really losing it. Okay, so that's about it, and I will end my presentation here. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Sharon. That was a really very comprehensive presentation there. I
Sorry
think
for
there's
the presentation.
no. I think there's few interesting things that the takeaway is like you mentioned the 200 million premium there, and then okay, some question, this quick question here. Who would be the check and balance here for these contract companies? Let's say you have your government staff, you can have a check and balance there. But in terms of all these contract companies, who check and balance them? Like what you said, when they come and check the pail, and then everything will be fine. But who else to check them?
Actually, during our research, the awkwardly what we found is when some of the workers highlighted their misery to that respective department, say the school security cleaners went up to the PPD and so on, the PPD actually turns them away, asks them to go to the labor department. And when they go to the labor department, sometimes the cases are taken in, sometimes the cases are rejected. There have been cases also where they were told to go back to the PPD. So there's been a ping pong kind of game going around. The workers are being passed by department to department, nobody knows. And very interestingly also, partially when we're almost completing our research, at that point of time, the Health Director General, actually, when he was asked to comment about the insufficient PPE for the workers in hospital, the DG said he has no power to enforce it. He can only get involved if the service are not there. So the people who actually award the contract are contradicting, saying that we have no power to enforce. Okay. At the same time, the labor department, who are supposed to enforce all these labor laws, are also being burdened with this extra work, and in certain cases, they are actually turning them back. So, who exactly is the check and balance? Question mark. There is no black and white answer, because I think the government department themselves are clueless who's supposed to. But in a rare case last year, Dr. Mazli actually got involved, and he actually instructed the PPD and the JPN to actually go and look into it. And that was the first time we saw the government was trying to clean his book. But then again, we have to actually give the credit to him, because he actually made the effort to blacklist some of the problematic contractors. But then again, all of this work was prematurely ended when the new education minister comes in. And at the moment, I am not sure what is the progress happening there. So that's to answer your question. Yeah.
I see. Okay, I think I'll just put Sharan on hold first, then we'll come back with him with more Q&A session for open the floor. I think for all those people, para hadirin, please send in more comments lah. We'll ask all these panelists after they present it. Okay, sekarang saya akan menjemput saudari Thilemma lah. Yeah. Okay, hai saudari Thilemma.
Hai, selamat malam.
Okay, saudari Thilemma seorang Setiausaha Agung Kesatuan Pekerja lah, yang di pekerja swasta Hospital Kerajaan. Seperti saya terangkan tadi, dia sudah bekerja selama 23 tahun sejak tahun 1997. Kita akan tanya sedikit lah apa masalah yang beliau menghadapi semasa bekerja di hospital. Okey, saudari Thilemma.
Ya, saya. Nama saya Thilemma. Saya bekerja di Hospital Bahagia Ulu Kinta. Saya bekerja selama 23 tahun di hospital yang sama. Saya sebagai Setiausaha Agung Kesatuan Pekerja-Pekerja Swasta Perkhidmatan Sokongan di Hospital Kerajaan Semenanjung Malaysia.
Okey, saudari, ada berapa soalan di sini. Okey. Apakah masalah yang biasa, saya didapati awak bekerja selepas sistem kontrak itu diperkenalkan. Maksudnya, masa saudari bekerja, sistem kontrak itu sudah dikenalkan lah. Apakah perbezaan yang saudari boleh nampak masa itu?
Okey. Masa permulaan bila mereka tukar menjadikan swasta dari kerajaan, mulanya swasta bagi gaji lebih dari kerajaan. Masa itu 300-400 gaji, yang pekerja buruh am dia kasih dekat 700 masa itu untuk buruh am. Dia kasih naik itu, lepas tu Yang servis itu dia orang kira berapa tahun selepas dia orang berhenti dari 97. Dia sebelum itu dia bagilah, yang selepas itu dia tak bagi apa-apa untuk pekerja buruh am lah yang kerja di sekarang jadi kontrak. Okey. Itu adalah satu masalah besar. Sekarang kita jadi pekerja swasta, kita tak ada pension tak ada, duit servis tak ada, apa pun tak ada lah. Masa sekarang ni. Selepas itu dia mula-mula di kontrak yang ambil sekali ialah Propel Johnson Control. Dia orang yang ambil kami semua mula-mula. Masa itu gaji kami adalah 500. Tapi kebanyakan cuti tahun ikut tahun lah, pada mula kita masuk ikut tahun. Ikut tahun. Mula kerja 8 hari, lepas tu 12 hari, 16 hari, dia ikut berapa tahun kita kerja lah. Lepas tu, tapi ada panel, ada dia bagi 1,000, panel 1,000, dan dia cuti tahun ikut tahun, public holiday dia bagi semua. Lepas tu untuk panel dia untuk family, untuk semua family lah, anak dan suami untuk semua. Lepas tu cuti sakit ada, family day dia ada buat, dia ada bawa pergi jalan-jalan pun ada, semua adalah benefit yang masa itu mula-mula dia ambil semua dia bagilah, tak ada masalah. Pada masa itu gaji 500 itu memang pada masa itu boleh servis, kita boleh kontrol lah, boleh lah jaga family ke apa ke boleh lah, untuk bayar rumah ke apa ke boleh lah. Lepas tu bila dah ambil dia ujung lepas kita dikonfirm, dia akan kenaikan gaji, dia dah bagi Johnson, Propel ada bagi, kenaikan ada bagi, lepas itu bonus ada bagi. Lepas setelah dia dah berhenti, dia bukan berhenti, dia tukarkan pagi dia punya kontrak pada Faber Mediserve. Pada Mediserve itu dia bagi, bukan dia kasih sambung, bukan kami diberhentikan, dia bagi kita sambung untuk Faber lah. Apa benefit yang kita dapat dari Propel, dia sambung balik lah, tak ada masalah, kita pun ikut jagalah, ada kenaikan bonus, family day, cuti tahun ada, dia sambung. Dalam Propel kita dah kerja 3 tahun, lepas berapa hari cuti tahun dia tambah tu semua dia bagi juga, tak ada masalah. Kita pun kerja jugalah, tak ada apa masalah pun tak ada. Kami tak ada susah lah nak buat kerja. Lepas tu sambung balik lagi, lepas tu pula lagi dia kena dikontrakkan. Lepas tu kontrak balik pun kita pun ingat apa saya kontrak balik, lain kontrak pula ambil CCSB. Okey, tengok kebajikan apa yang dia bagi, okey semua adalah, kita pun tak ada masalah lah. Kita ingat servis kita ada, kita punya cuti tahun ada, semua ada, public ada, tak ada dikurangkan, panel tak ada dikurangkan, semua kita ada. Tak payahlah kita susah hati, kita kerja. Dah kerja, lepas tu tukar pula lagi sekali, kontrak lagi. Kami pun fikir kenapa pula kontrak, tak apa, dia cakap dia disambungkan. Bila dia katakan disambungkan, kita tak ada masalah sebab servis kita masih diikut. Apa yang ada itu diikut, semua ada benefit, kebajikan semua dia bagi. Kami pun tak ada masalah, kita kerja juga. Bila tahun 2013, dia bila PA ambil PA Otal, dia 5 tahun dia jaga kami. Masa itu pun dia kenaikan itu tak ada, kurang jugalah, tak bagi. Tahun last dia tak bagi bonus semalah, kenaikan tak ada. Lepas tu kita pun ingatlah tak apalah, lain kontrak mari tak ada masalah. Bila lain kontrak mari, dijadikan orang baru. Bila kita soal, dia orang pun cakap tak ada ni, dia orang ni kontrak baru kena ikut jugalah. Siapa nak kerja, siapa tak nak kerja, hati orang lah, dia cakap. Itu pun last minute. Bulan 12 juga dia orang dah dekat 29, 28, 29, 30, 31 hari bulan. Dekat dalam 1 minggu dia suruh sign, dia suruh hantar. Masa itu juga sign. Masa itu juga mau hantar borang. Kita tak dan baca apa pun. Masalah juga kita tak dan. Macam mana nak baca? Dia cakap sekarang sign, sekarang kasih. kami terpaksalah buat semua sebab kita nak kerja, sebab kita nak ada family, kita tak boleh lawan. Okey, kita pun ingat buatlah dulu. Lepas tu kami pun tengok banyak masalah juga. Kita pun fikir nak buat satu kesatuan. Biar kesatuan juga menyoal. Saya banyak kali pergi soal, tapi dia orang tak layan. Dia tanya, lepas tu dia diam juga. Tak ada buat apa-apa keputusan, tak ada bagi jawapan. Saya seorang lawan pun susah juga kan. Selalu suara-suara. Semua orang takut. Semua orang takut kehilangan kerja. Takut nanti supervisor tegur ke apa ke. Dia orang takut dengan majikan. Dia orang tak beranilah datang mau lawan. Lepas tu kami tubuhlah kesatuan. Kesatuan boleh lawan, boleh tanya kepada majikan. Dia juga boleh masuk dalam masyarakat, boleh tanya apa hal pun boleh tanya melalui kesatuan. Itulah kami buat kesatuan. Masalah ini boleh ubah, kita ingat.
Okey, saudari, yang saudari cakap berapa syarikat company majikan sudah tukar semasa tahun 27 tahun saudari bekerja? Okey,
dari 23 tahun saya kerja, selama 7 syarikat dah pindah. Syarikat yang last sekarang UMS yang ambil kami. UMS yang last ambil kami lah. Sudah 7 syarikat tukar. Dekat 5 syarikat tak ada masalah. Last 2 syarikat juga masalah. Dia jadikan orang baru kami. Dia kasih benefit, dia punya surat tawaran itu pekerja baru. Maksud kita jadi pekerja baru. Dia tak ingat yang servis yang kami buat itu semua dari tak kira. Itu yang kami jadi masalah besar. Pekerja pun susah, tak ada tempat mau mengadu, tu kita buat kesatuan. Tubuhkan kesatuan untuk pekerja.
So maksudnya gaji saudari dari tahun 1997 sudah tidak banyak naik sebab dia banyak syarikat tukar. Betul ke tidak?
Okey. Masa mula-mula saya kerja di Propel, dia bagi gaji 500. Lepas tu ada kenaikan sampai 2006, gaji saya last 720. Itu juga last punya gaji. Lepas tu mana-mana syarikat tak naikkan gaji saya, pekerja. Lepas tu dia orang kerajaan yang naikkan gaji untuk kami. Bila kerajaan umum baru dia orang naikkan gaji kami sampai sekarang.
Okey, yang saudari cakap tadi yang kontrak syarikat dia datang, dia renew kontrak. Katakan yang you tak mau kerja sebabkan benefit tak ada. Adakah banyak pengurangan dalam segi kerja? Macam tahun 1997 saudari ada 20-30 kawan pekerja. Tapi sekarang lebih kurang pekerja dan saudari perlu kerja lebih banyak.
Okey, pada masa itu memang ramai pekerja. Sekarang pun ada juga. Dulu pekerja tak lari sebab gaji, bonus, kenaikan, benefit banyak ada. Tak lari walaupun masa itu 500, itu memang tinggi lah. Masa itu memang gaji itu tinggi. Tapi sekarang memang kita gaji 1,200. Sekarang barang semua mahal. Apa rumah pun mahal, kereta pun mahal, barang biasa guna dapur pun mahal. Kita nak beli barang pun memang tak cukup duit. Susah kita nak belanja. Susah sebab takkan dah 23 tahun gaji saya 1,200. Mesti mau lebih kan? Kita mau gaji lebih. Kalau kita harapkan minta kerajaan mau tunggu kerajaan. Kerajaan naik baru kita naik. Kalau kerajaan tak kasih naik, tak adalah kita orang naik gaji. Itu yang kita masalah selalu mengalami, susah mau cakap. Bila kita tanya sendiri pun, dia orang pun tak ada jawapan yang tepat untuk kami lah. Susah juga kita orang.
Apakah jawapan yang dia orang bagi masa saudari tanya kenapa tak ada benefit seperti ini?
Dia cakap ikut arahan dari apa yang kita sign, borang pekerja tu, Kena ikut itulah dia cakap. You baru masuk, you kena ikutlah, dia kata. Lepas tu
Tapi
dia ada
saudari-
kata, ya.
Tapi saudari bukan baru masuk.
Memanglah kita tak masuk, dia orang juga baru masuk. Tapi kita orang lama, kita pun kerja di hospital kerajaan. Bukan di kilang kita orang kerja. Tapi apa yang kita kata, kita orang lama sebab kita ada pengalaman. Orang lama ada macam pengalaman dari orang baru. Kenapa orang lama semua tak boleh sambung, bukan tak nak kerja? Tekanan ada sikit, ada tekanan. Lagipun tak ada kenaikan. Ada lelaki, tahulah lelaki, orang budak-budak lelaki tu memang tak cukup gaji. Perempuan bolehlah kita orang save tu duit kan. Lelaki ada family, bini tak kerja, cukup ke gaji 1,200? Memang tak cukupnya. Susah dia orang nak beli rumah pun tak boleh. Sekarang ikut nak beli rumah fikir sangat. Lagipun kita mau ambil loan pun tak layak. Kita tak layak sebab gaji kita rendah. Lagipun susah kita nak minta kan. Rumah kos rendah pun 100,000 lebih. Macam mana kita nak beli? Masalah juga lagi anak belajar, kita kena belanja duit. Banyak kita keperluan. Lagi masa sekarang COVID, nasib baik kita orang ada kerja. Kalau tak kerja, susah juga kita pun. Itulah terpaksa itu yang ramai dia orang cari kerja lebih, dia orang tinggal, lari. Budak-budak lelaki lah ramai mau lari, cari kerja elok, gaji lebih dia orang.
Oh, saudari, kita tadi ada bincang pasal wabak COVID-19 lah. Saya dengar kata itu belanjawan 2021, dia ada satu allowance khas untuk frontliners seperti doktor dan jururawat sebanyak RM500 saya rasa sampai wabak ini habis. Dan lagi satu peruntukan. Adakah pekerja kontrak seperti saudari ada benefit untuk allowance ini?
Okey. Masa ini kerajaan, saya haraplah kerajaan ambil berat tentang pekerja cleaner lah, cleaner. Sebab cleaner adalah, dia cakap frontliner. Kebetulan cleaner juga frontliner. Sebab dia yang pergi dulu bersihkan ke tempat itu, COVID punya tempat. Sebelum doktor periksa, nurse ke, sister ke, sebelum dia orang pergi periksa, cleaner kena bersihkan dulu tempat itu, baru dia orang boleh periksa pesakit. Kalau dia tak ada ambil berat tentang pekerja cleaner, siapa yang ambil berat tentang pekerja cleaner? Dia orang pun kalau satu hari dia tak buat kerja macam COVID, masa COVID, tempat tu cleaner tak pergi kerja. Apa jadi? Tempat itu sampah penuh, tempat apa yang orang yang COVID pegangnya, tempat siapa mau lap, katil siapa mau lap, benda yang semua ada siapa yang nak buat kerja. Semua pun tak boleh kan? Itulah kalau tak boleh juga dia orang pun pergi kotor, dia pun tak, doktor pun tak masuk juga. Itu pasalnya kena ambil berat tentang pekerja cleaner pun lah. Janganlah tolak ni pekerja. Kita pun dia macam mana bahaya dia orang, kita pun bahaya juga. Ini pembersihan bukan senang. Kotor, bau, susah tu kerja. Bukan senang. Nak lap senang ke? Mau lap, mana dia pegang semua kena lap. Macam tempat duduk kena lap, pakai ubat. Kita kena pakai ubat kuman lagi. Kita banyak kerja juga kan. Inilah kena ingatkan pekerja yang kerja di COVID tu pun kena ingatlah.
Okey, saudari, apakah tuntutan union awak terhadap kerajaan?
Okey, tuntutan saya harapkan macam mana dulu buruh am ada, pekerja cleaner dijadikan buruh am, pekerja. Saya minta serap balik pekerja cleaner sebab semua kerja di hospital, di tempat kerajaan. Semua orang kerajaan juga kerja, sister lah, maka pengarah ada, penolong pengarah ada, matron ada, semua ada. Semua dia orang kerja sana. Kita orang bawa dia orang juga di kerja. Dia orang boleh jaga kami. Dia orang boleh suruh, boleh buat kerja, tak payah lain orang, tak payah kontrak. Buat apa mau kasih kontrak? Dia orang boleh survey kita orang. Kenapa pula dia orang tak nak ambil kita serap balik? Saya minta serap balik semua pekerja di hospital-hospital, buat pekerja kerajaan lah, janganlah jadi swasta. Sistem kontrak memang susah sebab sistem kontrak memang susah kita nak minta apapun. Sekarang kita orang sistem kontrak bukan benefit ada itu kekal. Sekarang benefit ada itu ditarik balik kita orangnya. Contohnya saya panel 1000, dia bagi sekarang 200, tak adil lah macam tu. Macam public holiday dulu 16 hari dia bagi, sekarang kasih 10 hari. Tak adil lah macam tu. Kita tak nak lah macam tu. Apa yang ada itu dia, bila kontrak dia tarik balik kita punya benefit, siapa nak tolong kita? Kesatuan lah nak tolong kita. Sekarang kita itulah minta bantuan dari kesatuan. Kalau boleh kita nak jadikan pekerja kerajaan.
Ya, ini memang tidak adil lah saya rasa dengar ni. Dan itu pentingnya adalah kesatuan dalam untuk pekerja. Terima kasih saudari Thilemma. Saya akan put you on side lah. Nanti kita akan tanya untuk Q&A. And okay, sekarang kita akan menjemput Dr. Niaz.
Terima kasih. Terima kasih.
We'll be introducing Dr. Niaz lah from the academic point of view. Hi, Dr. Niaz. Think you should unmute. Yeah. Hi, Dr. Niaz. How are you doing?
Good. Thank you for having me.
Okay. After what our researcher has presented, and you can heard from what. Okay, I'll just briefly summarize what our contract workers has been facing a problem. They're facing problems as wage stagnant and a lot of problems that the benefits have been taken out because of the contract system. Are you still with us, Dr. Niaz?
Yes. Hi.
Yeah, sorry, you went off for a while. I think a lot of unfairness was imposed because of there's a third-party system that if the company is good, the benefits will be protected. But somehow our research there says that the otherwise. Why do you think there's such problems in the system, or is it been seen around the world or such thing?
Indeed, what Sharan has shared with us is actually part of a global pattern. Even in the United States, which has arguably better labor laws, this has become a great concern. As many as 29 million workers in the US, even if we just focus on 10 industries, they are actually being managed through subcontracting. And this has been studied by economists. David Will, a labor economist in the US, has come up with a term called fissured workplace or fractured labor market. Fractured in the sense that 20 million workers on subcontract system, which are mostly providing low-end work, but in an insecure environment, on low wages, and this has led to working poverty in the United States. So therefore, this is a real concern, a global challenge, and we are right to discuss this in today's forum about this challenge.
Okay, let's really go back to really fundamental things like, okay, what really are the differences between let's say a permanent job and then the contract workers that we are talking about, and what really are the advantage and disadvantage there, and maybe some I would say arbitrage between the third party, or if someone doesn't check and balance some of the problems.
Mm-hmm. So permanent job by definition refers to secure employment. Typically this would involve non-seasonal full-time work where there is complete protection against arbitrary termination. There are non-pecuniary benefit packages in place, including provisions to protect worker well-being at the end of work life in old age. And the contract is fully formalized in all aspects. On the other hand, when we are thinking of contract workers, these are sometimes in part-time work, sometimes in full-time, but regardless, by definition, there is no job security because the tenure is short, it is uncertain. And this means that there is limited commitment by both parties. And contract work, therefore, is also a key component of what the International Labour Organization calls casual labor. And again, the degree of formalization is a lot less. So if you want to reflect on the advantage and disadvantage, that why so many companies, and now the Malaysian government is also thinking about contract jobs. So what are the advantages? So it depends from whose perspective we are assessing advantage. So if we are thinking of from the employee's perspective, certainly there is an advantage, which is flexibility. So if you're thinking of married women with children, contract job can be attractive because it offers work-life balance, part-time work, greater job mobility. Once you have a child, you withdraw from the labor market for a few years and then you return again. So this is difficult if you are in lifelong career path as a civil servant. So, and again, if you're thinking of young generation, Malaysians, many also prefer to try out many jobs instead of being married to one job. So in that sense, there is an advantage, being a contract worker. But then, that is where it stops. Because when we are comparing contract workers with civil servants or permanent workers, there are a range of disadvantages. And the first one is that of job insecurity. And particularly when you are approaching retirement, by virtue of being a contract worker, your employee does not contribute anything towards your old age pension. So you're pretty much on your own savings. But beyond that, a great source of vulnerability relates to lack of bargaining power, the absence of voice, lack of social dialogue, being subject to arbitrary change to your terms at the time of renewal, and not being able to influence that by virtue of the fact that you are a contract employee. And this adds a great deal to the psychological well-being, mental health of the worker, creating anxiety and range of distress and depression. But on top of that, unfortunately, although if you go by economic theory, which would tell you that because there is no job security, so the employer has to compensate you by offering a pecuniary premium. But in practice, it is the opposite. Contract workers don't enjoy a wage premium, rather they suffer a pecuniary penalty, meaning that in developing countries, broadly speaking, contract workers are always paid less compared to a permanent worker, even for doing the same job. Okay, so therefore, they're underpaid for doing the same work. And on top of that, there are hidden discrimination in terms of denial, of opportunities to pursue leadership positions, in the workplace. So that's some of the disadvantages, but overall, this seems to dominate the list of advantages.
So basically, the whole thing is for our case in Malaysia, it seems that it's not very giving more advantage in the sense that contract workers compared to permanent workers in this case, right?
So again, let me clarify. This is from the perspective of employee, but if you think of the employer's perspective, contract worker or having non-permanent worker is an advantage. It gives flexibility to employers, and what it means is that if there is fluctuation in demand for services in the market or in the economy, employers are able to adjust better, cope with shocks. So in economics, we call it a two-tiered labor market, where an employer is given the legal option to employ a combination of full-time permanent workers and contractual short-term appointees. So again, going by economic logic, this brings in efficiency. And there is evidence from high-income countries, particularly for Spain, when the government for the first time removed restriction on employment of contract workers, it led to a net addition in employment or job growth. And again, if you're thinking from the government's perspective, there is tremendous pressure on government to downsize. And again, this is an advantage. But I have to be careful and cautious there, because we are strictly measuring the financial cost or the fiscal benefit. There is another side to it, which relates to productivity, which I will comment on later on.
Okay. The system was introduced through a privatization in the 1990s. I think that was a trend for the developing countries, and it was really fast in the sense that costs was cut for governments and more resources were put into other places. But back to this point, they're saying that does it really save the cost, in the sense that, is there any evidence in other countries or any research paper that's saying that privatization did really quite save costs, or maybe it's not right?
Well, this is an interesting question, because Malaysia has a long legacy of privatization going all the way back to 1983. At that time, there was a demand for smaller but smarter government, and that demand has intensified over time. So what has happened, therefore, is between 1983 and 2009, as per government records, as many as 58 government agencies have been privatized. And it's not just that, 500 projects have been privatized as well. So if you put all these things together, during that 25 years, this has led to a transfer of over 110,000 government employees to the private sector. So we are talking about between 5 to 10% of the civil service workforce. So that did lead to some fiscal savings. If you're thinking of annual management expenditure being saved according to government records, this is to the tune of 25 billion ringgit in over a period of 25 years. And again, so there has been capital expenditure saving as well. So this is therefore definitely sizable. And again, note that this is the estimate covering the period 1983 to 2009. I don't have the numbers for recent years, but this is a sizable saving.
Okay. I think what we heard of some of the workers, that lot of complaints there, and a lot of, I think what we focus on, the word we keep coming back is job securities and benefits. And how do we look forward into protecting all these workers?
Sorry, what is your question?
Okay, what we discussed from the three panelists just now, I think there's two words that we came by: job security. I think that's really the crux of the problem of why all these contract workers were not protected. And beneath the job securities are these benefits such as leaves. Some of them EPFs were taken off and such. How do we move forward to protect all these workers that being arbitraged from the contract system?
So I think we have to start by getting our priority right. So I think the issue is not about whether it's a contract worker or whether it's a permanent worker. The issue should be about well-being of Malaysian workforce. The issue should be about decent jobs. The issue should be about equality of opportunity. Because we are at a crossroad. The government is about to launch 12 Malaysia plan. We have put together the Vision 2030 document, where the emphasis is on shared prosperity. where the focus is on ensuring that we will harness an economic system that would give everyone their due share. And this is where the problem is, that while we are trying to finance a government that is fiscally smart, we are running into a trade-off. It's a very difficult trade-off. Rather it's a dilemma, that on one hand we have a labor regime in a two-tiered labor market where we are giving flexibility to employers. We are reducing fiscal burden on the government by virtue of casualizing employment. But at the same time, we are making it harder to fulfill our long-term vision of shared prosperity by making sure that that part of the workforce for whom the main source of income is labor, earnings, is protected, that casualization does not deplete their labor share in Malaysia's GDP. And this is where the problem is. I say it's a problem because if we look at global evidence, in developed countries, the wage penalty between a contract worker and a permanent worker is reasonably small, sometimes non-existent, because they have full provision in laws to make sure that employees are not discriminated based on their contract, be that in permanent, if it's a permanent contract or it's a short-term contract. Whereas because in developing countries like Malaysia, these provisions are not there, contract enforcement law are weak, there are loopholes, the wage penalty can be between 50 to 100%. And that is where the problem is. And this is the challenge for Malaysia, that how do we manage our workforce in a way so that we create incentive for everyone to enter the labor force and contribute fully based on their productivity without disincentivizing, without demotivating them. And as we speak, this is a challenge. I don't see enough provisions in place. If we go by the evidence, again, for developing countries, contract workers are systematically demotivated. They are systematically in distress. They are systematically underpaid. And this is on top of their job security. And without resolving this, by single-handedly pushing the reform for what many call position-based employment instead of career-based employment, I think we are getting our priority wrong. So again, in the context of the country's long-term vision, the emphasis should be on, decent job for everyone, where regardless of contract nature, everyone should have protection, against shocks, security for old age, and again, opportunities to prosper within the profession. And once we set that as a priority, I think the differences or the distress that we currently see between contract and permanent workers would go away.
Correct. Thank you, Dr. Niaz. I think we should bring all the panelists back and let's open the floor for Q&A. Okay. Let me look for some questions. There's a lot of questions. Banyak soalan. Saya perlu filter dan tengok dulu ya. Okay. Question ni dari Encik Arul. Question to Sharan. Most of these contractors maybe UMNO cronies, but when PS took over, did they clean up the list? I think this one quite political, but yeah. Tuju kepada Sharan.
Okay. Thank you, Wing. Thank you, Arul, for that question. Dengan izin, I'll just jawab dalam bahasa Inggeris. Okay. So, did PH clean up the list? Straight answer, no. They did not clean up the list. For hospital, it was business as usual. Nothing really changed. For schools, nothing much. They still went by the same mechanism. Although there was some attempts to blacklist certain contractors, there was some attempts to make some cleanups and so on. But did they really clean up the whole list? No, not really. And there's also cases where blacklisted contractors or problematic companies, they actually shut down the company and open up a new entity. So it's technically the same person with a different name. So long story short, did they clean up the list? No, they did not.
Okay, ada berapa komen lah di Facebook sekarang. Ada seorang daripada Encik Azmadi Azman. Dia katakan termasuk pekerja, dia seorang pekerja di klinik kesihatan adalah tidak adil kepada pekerja. Pekerja bekerja lama tanpa ada allowance kenaikan gaji dan penambahan cuti. Azmadi Azman, Mr. Azmadi was talking about his experience in clinic. He had a lot of unfair treatment was there. I think what Dr. Niaz was talking about, the wage penalty, the no allowance increase and such. It really reflects some of the problems with our system in the country, the CC. Yeah, go down and read more of the comments. Dari saudari Siva Ranjani, pekerja kontrak ini tidak jaminan kerja. Setiap kali kontraktor bertukar, pekerja yang sedia ada dijadikan pekerja baru dan atau diganti kerja. Masalah ini juga dibincanglah oleh saudari Thilemma. What this lady was talking about is a lot of workers were, they work like saudari Thilemma was working 27 years, and 7 companies in and out changing. Their benefits was not retained because of the contract system, and some of them we take up as a new workers, like someone working 10 years and they were hired as a new worker. So a lot of things like annual leaves, wage increment was not part of that. So it seems that this is one of the problems there, the job security and the increment there. And I think, yeah, anyone would want to comment about, add more things on it?
I just want to make a quick comment on what Daniel was telling and also relating to what Saudari Thilemma was telling just now. During the 97, when they started privatization, there was a substantial amount of budget given just to provide higher wage in the private sector. So this is in the way to actually pull out more of the workers from the public sector to come to the private sector. But then in the long run, that's where they start to lose out. So what Jani was saying, I agree with her. Because initially, they have promised them with better wages, but then they took away their job security. And because the loss of the job security over the period of time, every time you go for a re-employment, you slowly start eroding their benefits, their wages increment, and then so on. So this is what exactly happened. Right? And this case is actually similar also when we look in the schools and so on. The beginning of the privatization, you have to give them better terms to pull them out of the public sector. And the moment you pull out, that's where the austerity measure, the reduction, and then so on, the squeezing and everything happens. And there's one more thing I would like to talk about is this one contradiction we noticed. Currently, just now, Ms. Thilemma also, she told that now the government is increasing what she is referring to as the minimum wage. So without the minimum wage, the workers has no increment. But then again, the government has fixed the contract value for the next 10 years in the hospital. So in a particular, I'm going to spend only going to give out about 300 million ringgit for this entire country. All right. And the moment you increase the minimum wage, their cost goes up. Okay, so the cost has to go up and you shrink the profit. Okay, so the government now has a dilemma where if the moment they increase the minimum wage for throughout the whole country, their own operational cost that they give to their contractors actually goes up. And then the squeezing also begins. And there are also, I'm very sure there's pressure from the contractors onto the government not to raise the minimum wage. Because the moment you raise the minimum wage, then they could not squeeze more profit out from the 300 million paid by the government. So this is a contradiction going on there, right? Because you need the wages to go up every year, but the moment you go up, the value of the contract you give is insufficient really. So this is the biggest contradiction happening there. And in a way, we actually see that this outsourcing contract given out is one of the reasons why the government cannot push the minimum wage higher also, because the moment they push minimum wage for the private sector, the public sector contract also gets hurt immediately. So there's a contradiction happening here. So that I just want to quickly highlight that. Thank you. I think you're mute, Wing.
Sorry. Okay, I think the minimum wage was introduced in 2013 or 2014. Gaji rendah diperkenalkan dari tahun 2013 ke 2014. Saudari Thilemma, masa tu gaji saudari adalah di bawah gaji rendah atau gaji di atas?
Masa itu memang kita kerajaan umum baru kita naik 1,000. Sebelum itu memang saya gaji 720 saja gaji saya. Kerajaan umum suruh naik swasta baru naik gaji kita. Tak ada kalau kita tak ada kenaikan.
Saudari kata RM700 kan?
Ya.
Masa sebelum maksudnya sebelum gaji minimum dikenakan dia kontrak syarikat perlu bayar ekstra RM500. Maksudnya stagnant wage itu dia telah tidak dinaikkan sebelum itu. Dan ini memang tidak adil saya rasa.
Okey, pada masa mula itu tahun 1977 gaji kami adalah 500. Lepas itu setiap tahun ada kenaikan, 50 ada, 30 ada, ikutlah kita punya kerja kan. Lepas tu sampai tahun 2006 itulah last kenaikan gaji saya. Lepas itu kerajaan umum baru semua pekerja ada naik gaji. Syarikat tak naikkan gaji kami.
Okay, we hit few more comments, then we can I think wrap it up. Okay, there's a question for you, Dr. Niaz. Isn't this contract work for permanent fixed job is a violation of the ILO convention? It's by netizens called Aruli here.
Yes, it is. As per ILO, contract work should be preserved for seasonal work. That jobs that are season specific. But if the nature of the work is permanent, that the service is required year in, year out, then workers hired for this should also be in permanent position. And precisely for this reason, many countries, including developed and developing, have very specific legal provisions, Employment Act, specific to contract workers. There are countries where precisely because of this shared concern with ILO, they have actually banned employers from hiring large number of employees on a contract basis, and when it is allowed, it's restricted to 1 year. And even in China, if you are in the same job for 10 years, your employer has to offer you a permanent contract beyond that. Now, so yes, it is correct that ILO looks at it as a violation of labor rights.
Okay, I'll take another 2 more minutes. If there's no comments, then I'll proceed to ending this forum. Okay, there's one actually there. Profesor Niaz katakan kebaikan bekerja secara kontrak itu bagi orang muda maupun tapi kemana tidak sepatutnya dipapas. Okay, that's a statement. It's not a question there. Okay, saya akan tanyalah. Okay, we'll wrap up this thing, or you should just want to take Sharan. You want to take that question?
Okay, but this is not in research. I think CU, they have their own kroni list. Actually, there's one interesting thing that we noticed when we're doing some of the research and so on. and also with some of our professional experience when we're doing, we noticed that after Barisan loss and Pakatan came in, a lot of the cronies within Barisan, they also joined Pakatan. So they became a membership in Pakatan. So the cronies is very, very fluid. They don't actually stick with this. They are not a BN crony, They become cronies of anybody who becomes the governor of the day. So they followed them. And when PH lost, they went back to Perikatan Pribumi and so on. So did they have their own list? Actually, the crony becomes everybody's government list at that day. And without strong reform towards the government system, these so-called contractors, these cronies, these beneficiaries, they just keep on moving. They will just keep on anybody. So which is why one of the reasons it's very hard to be reformed, even because the political flag may have changed, but then again, the so-called beneficiaries, they're actually flowing there. So they immediately also changed. So did they have their own crony list? They will get their own crony list. Regardless who become the government, they will become the crony list. So unless the political party takes a tough stand, ending up the contract system, ending out this business political nexus, this political patronage, this thing will keep on continuing. It doesn't matter. Because when we saw after Pakatan left power, immediately these beneficiaries immediately switch allegiance, like instantly within a night. So because for them it's just filling up the form overnight, that's about it. So yeah, that's my comment.
That's kind of funny to hear this. Okay, but I believe we from JPKK will not be bowing down to this kind of pressure. I actually say so. Okay, I'll just take the last question here from Tinagaran. Mr. Tinagaran said job is the security for every worker. Okay, why are you jumping here and there? Okay. Okay, which question you want me to do, Daniel?
I see our tech guy is jumping around.
Okay, I'll just comment this. So according to Professor Niaz, don't marry to one job. For job security, there has to be a better contract to protect the contracted workers. In this case, contract can be attractive and work well if being addressed properly. In other words, Professor Niaz is not agreeing with demolishing, but improving it. I think he didn't, what Dr. Niaz said is, the point of contract system is the product of it. But because of a lot of things there, they're saying that the support system is not there. I mean, JPKK can agree or not agree with him, but let's say let what Dr. Niaz will say.
So again, if we go by theory, the theory is very clear that if you take away job security, compensate the worker. It is very clear. The theory is very clear, and the global consensus is also very clear that contract workers should be compensated for doing the same work, but in an insecure context. And the problem with the way contract workers are managed is that this promise is not kept. As Sharon was pointing out, that once it is being pushed into the system as an option, workers become exploited by employers. They don't get their due share. And it's not just, denial of fair wage. It is also the lack of voice, absence of social dialogue, being cut off from the wage bargaining process. These are universal human rights, labor rights. And again, by virtue of being a contract worker, these are being denied. And that is why ILO raises this concern, again, in terms of worker rights. So what is the upshot? The upshot is that when you have a mature labor market with sound institutions, with due legal protection and provision to create a level playing field for all workers so that everyone gets their due share against their productivity, whether you have a contractual system in place is not a problem. The law is there to make sure that you are rewarded based on your productivity, but that is not the case in Malaysia. And that is where the problem is. And it is not just the story of Malaysia. Globally, there is this developing and developed country divide, that the insecurity, the indecency, the unfairness that we typically associate with contract work is largely specific to developing countries. As you move to developed countries, the extent of unfairness, the wage penalty, the sense of insecurity diminishes. And again, what I want to add here is academic evidence coming from developing countries. If you take the case of India, where contract school teachers do the same work of permanent civil servant teachers and yet being paid 5 times less. And in some instances, their performance is actually better. So what is happening is that the employers get more out of the worker by exploiting their sense of vulnerability, the insecurity. And that is indecency, and that is a gross violation of human rights, that workers should not work hard in fear of losing their job. Everyone should be paid fairly based on their productivity, and that should not be about whether you have a full-time, whether you have a permanent job or a temporary contract. And again, so therefore this is raising questions about the legal provisions, the larger labor market institutions. And those are the fundamental issues we should be focusing on. And I think that's where the reform is due. Until those are in place, contract system is going to lead to greater casualization of the workforce, and it is going to lead to greater working poverty. And I must emphasize that this is in nobody's interest. The government and employers may save in the short run, but in the long run, this is going to come at the cost of nation's well-being. And we have learned the lesson from COVID that this is the people crisis, that unless we take care of the mental and physical well-being of our workforce, we run the risk of another disease outbreak. So therefore, I think we have to balance the physical needs and concerns. At the same time, we must make sure that it does not trade off our long-term, larger mission, which is really about ensuring well-being and shared prosperity of the economic growth and so on.
Okay, I think I'll wrap up lah. I'll start with saudari Thilemma. Saudari Thilemma, sekali lagi saya akan wrap up lah forum ini. Apakah tuntutan kesatuan dan apakah tuntutan kesatuan lah saya rasa untuk wrap up.
Okey. Ketuntutan kesatuan, kalau boleh kerajaan serap balik semua pekerja cleaner, semua hospital yang seluruh di Malaysia. Saya harap kerajaan akan bagi peluang untuk pekerja cleaner.
Okay, terima kasih saudari. Saudara Sharan, any last words for?
Okay, I think our research conclude was very simple. Don't fix what is not broken. I think the pre-privatization, the workers under the government system was actually better than what we're doing. And this 25 years of experiment is actually have shown that it has failed. And a lot of leakages, wastages are prone to corruption, prone to patronage. And we have seen the politic, it actually strengthens the politic business nexus here. So I think it should go back to when it was originally with the workers. And under the current system, the workers are now being switched contractors. So they're permanently at the premises. So I think the Thilemma's demand of them, the workers should be absorbed by government is not unreasonable, it's acceptable. So yes, don't fix what is not broken. I think the workers should be definitely absorbed as a government staff. Thank you.
Okay, I'll just say what JPKK stands for. I think JPKK stands for against that contract system, regardless of the panelists on how they feel. And this is just a sharing session. Nobody's stance is it's on their own. It doesn't represent what JPKK is. But JPKK tuntutan actually is three things there. If Daniel is ready to share tuntutan yang JPKK. Yeah. Okay, Okey, sedikit masalah teknikal lah, tapi saya akan katakanlah tuntutan, ada 3 tuntutan JPKK lah di sini. Tuntutan pertama adalah menyerap baliklah, seperti saudari Thilemma katakan, menyerap balik semula semua pekerja kontrak yang sebelum ni dikenalkan, di-replace by sistem kontrak sekarang. Dan kedua adalah hapuskan pihak ketiga, which is a middleman dalam isu ini adalah kontrak-kontrak pekerja majikan yang seperti dikatakan dalam dengan saudari Thilemma, and also reduce the red tape lah, kurangkan pembaziran yang seperti yang saudara Sharan katakan, premium yang diberikan kepada pekerja majikan ni adalah 200 juta. Sebenarnya 200 juta ni boleh diperuntukkan lebih kepada pembangun yang lain, dan saudara Sharan juga katakan 1.3 bilion allocation sebenarnya boleh mewujudkan lebih banyak pekerja kesihatan, hospital cleaner, pekerja pengawal, dan mereka tidak perlu bekerja lebih masa seperti yang dirintihkan daripada saudari Thilemma tadi. Okey, JPKK seterusnya akan menghantar satu petition. Petition ni ada di dalam Facebook kita. Petition ni kita akan menghantar kepada Perdana Menteri Malaysia untuk menyeru, nasihat beliau untuk consider this sistem kontrak pekerja dimansuhkan, sebab dia adalah tidak adil lah kepada pekerja-pekerja kita. Research kita pun sudah katakan itu. Okay lah, I think that's it. Thank you very much. Terima kasih kepada panelis-panelis yang tadi untuk sudi meluangkan masa pada malam ini, dan selamat malam kepada semua.